Well, thank you, Kyle, Kathy, our distinguished speakers, and ladies and gentlemen. Could I echo the sentiments that Kyle has expressed in respect of our membership base here in Queensland? We cannot do the research that we do. We cannot undertake the public forums that we do. We cannot help to try and shape good public policy outcomes from a fiercely independent perspective if it's not for the support of our membership base. So to those of you that are members, those that have been acknowledged in taking corporate tables, particularly Norton Rose for their very, very full support of this research report, we thank you all. We hope you get value from it because as a strategic intent, what CEDA seeks to do is to publish annually 4 pieces of research, a major work and 3 policy perspectives. Today is one of those policy perspectives, but because of one line that we put in our media release about today, there was reference back to the policy perspective that we released back in June of this year on the economics of climate change, and I'll say something about that in a moment. But to get to where we are, we have an incredibly amazing group of individuals with our membership, with people that make up our Council on Economic Policy, with our Board of Governors, who all come together and make suggestions about what is good economic policy and what is it that CEDA should offer by way of research that is going to pick up on that. And the product of that, of course, is today. And obviously with G20 taking place here in Australia, with Australia chairing the G20 in Brisbane in November, we thought that there was some clear guidance that needed to be given around the content of those discussions. We thought that there was a genuine need to highlight the fact that this won't just be a talk fest if something positive comes from it. And we thought that it was imperative as well that a couple of specific areas around financial architecture and around taxation be highlighted as things that the G20 really needed to get its teeth into. The truth of it is that G20 has made a substantial contribution to international financial and economic architecture. The global financial crisis, the effects of which are still being felt in many countries around the world, would not have gotten to the stage that it is and allowed a level of economic growth to take place internationally had it not been for some of the coordinating policies that the G20 undertook. And we think that the G20, as a consequence, must have learnt something from that. And I'm sure John Edwards is going to pick up on this theme as well. There must be some underlying reasons around the G20's examination of why the GFC actually took place. And what is it that in the future international governments need to put in place by way of good public policy that can mitigate against those sorts of things happening again in the future? That's one of the things that we think is important that the G20 examine here in Australia. We think it's important in taxation as well that a couple of things happen. We think it's important, as our report states, and Kerry has particular responsibility for examining this, the transparency, the way in which we can actually see what happens in international taxation arrangements is explored by the G20 and good public policy outcomes emerge. We have suggested that the burden of international profit shifting on governments clearly be examined, but some positive outcomes come from it. International tax shifting, shifting the tax burden, all of these are synonyms for the same thing. Multinational corporations, by sticking a plaque on a grass hut in Vanuatu or the Cayman Islands, can channel all of their profits through and pay almost next to zero tax in the home jurisdictions where those profits are made. Now, if you're in business, you're probably saying, well, tax minimisation is not a bad thing. And you're probably right. This is an argument that's been and gone. But tax avoidance, hiding what is a fair and reasonable outcome for countries, is a problem. And why? Because governments are constantly under the pump about providing services, providing infrastructure, providing what the public expects of them, but they need the financial resources to do so. And if multinational companies are shifting massive amounts of taxation away from those jurisdictions, that task for government is even harder. And I'm sure Kerry will have a bit to say about that as well. We did also, as I suggest, touched on in our report, about the economics of climate change, and we felt that it needed to be on the agenda. We're not interested in getting down and dirty into that debate as to what is the best approach to dealing with climate change. Let's accept the science. What we're saying is there is a risk imperative for companies and for countries in respect to climate change. And there needs to be risk mitigation strategies put in place to deal with this very real issue into the future. The example that we used in our previous report, particularly here in Queensland, although not just here in Queensland, Cyclone Yessi. Was there an economic imperative around that? Well, yes, there was. We all had to put our hands in our pocket and put 0.25% levy on top of our Medicare levy to pay for infrastructure redevelopment in North Queensland. Coal mines flooded for months, unable to produce. People sitting idly by when they should be in productive work. Is there an economic implication for events such as that? Well, you better believe there is. The hurricanes that hit New York and the frequency with which these things are happening now, the devastation from tornadoes in central USA, and a range of other of these initiatives. This is not coming from a greenie perspective. This is about economics. This is about why, when the G20 people are here, when the Chinese have already suggested they're going to reduce emissions by 40%, when Barack Obama's out there talking about some changes in the US of all places around this, we already know what the Europeans' position on this is. Isn't it then an issue of economics? And we think that it should be on the agenda, and I'm hopeful that some of the signs coming from our Prime Minister that suggest it might be considered under the energy portfolio as part of the agenda, at least it will get a run. But we think it's more important simply than sidetracking it. So our report, our latest report, offers a number of observations and some critiques about just what exactly the G20 has done. We have concluded it is more than a talk fest. We have concluded it can make a genuine contribution if there is goodwill amongst good men and women that are going to be here. If they go away with some concrete ideas that are then going to be turned into good public policy. If our Prime Minister, for example, takes away from his chairmanship of what happens here with 20 of the world's leaders, in fact more if you count all the people that come from the European Union, if they're all here and making a contribution, and then behind that, the B20, the business leaders in Australia, looking at some of the implications on what we need to do, whether it be in taxation, whether it be in trade, whether it be in education, whether it be in a whole raft of things that we've alluded to and particularly remarked on in our report, then we will have done good, played strong. If we are able to achieve all of that and get some good public policy outcomes from it, it will be a great result for Australia and indeed the G20 more generally. We are interconnected in this world now. We cannot simply say we are isolated from the effects of international profit shifting or of taxation arrangements. We cannot say that we are isolated from a whole raft of financial transactions and transparency questions associated with banking regimes. None of that happens anymore. And we must be part of the solution. And G20 will do that. I hope you find our research interesting when you take it home tonight and read it before you go to bed. It's a page turner, won't take you long. Hold your attention, every page says something really special. So take it with you, go forward as disciples of CEDA, spread the message according to CEDA. This is, as I say, the latest in what I think is a long line of very important reports that where we're seeking to make this contribution about good public policy outcomes. Enjoy your lunch. We'll be back shortly. Thank you.